UAA, College of Business and Public Policy.
Hello, I'm Dr. Darren Prokop, Professor of Logistics in the College of Business and Public Policy at the University of Alaska Anchorage. Welcome to my video interview with Terry Howard, President of Carlisle Transportation Systems, recorded on May 8, 2019. Mr. Howard, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you achieved your position of leadership at Carlisle Transportation.
So I came to Alaska in 1975 as part of a military family, like many Alaskans do. Attended a local high school, attended UAA. I had a long history in the equipment maintenance, equipment rental fleets, equipment sales fleets. And so in 2013, I had decided to seek a different career. I had worked for a company that all of a sudden became owned by a publicly traded company that didn't really resonate with me. As I made the joke, I said, well, we were a crane rental company that used accounting as a support function, and now we're an accounting company that occasionally rents and sells cranes. The publicly traded companies have a tremendous amount of accounting that they have to abide by. And so in 2013, I decided to make a change. Carlisle had been purchased by Saltchuk in June of 2013. I joined in September of 2013. I actually joined the organization as the Director of Maintenance. And in August of 2014, they had asked me to be the Vice President of Operations. And then in March of 2015, they decided to make a change. They wanted a different president, and we were in a group setting, and we were having a dialogue, and all the other people stepped backwards, and it gave the appearance that I had volunteered and looked like I had stepped forward. So I actually took over the role of president in March of 2015. At that point in time, I was the fourth president in 18 months. The organization had been going through a tremendous amount of changes, not only with the ownership and the internal structures, but if you recall, and I know you're very well versed in it, the economy was very much imbalanced and really struggling. And so that caused a lot of consternation within the organization. And so I took the role in 2015. And recently, our team celebrated our 4-year anniversary.
Well, congratulations on that. And being part of the Saltchuk family of companies, quite the collection of intermodal transportation for Alaska and beyond. What's it like as president of Carlisle Transportation dealing with your counterparts in the sister companies, for example, Foss and Tote Maritime and Northern Air Cargo, it goes on. Can you tell us a little bit about your interaction?
So there's a lot of interesting dynamics there. On many occasions, we are partners and we work on projects together. We use common resources. We obviously have a large umbrella insurance that we all take advantage of. There are unique instances where we are competitors, where sometimes we are bidding on a project, and because of the different relationships that we have and different involvements in the industries, we often find out we may be competing on something and then we have to regroup. To a large extent, many of the Saltchuk companies are vendors and customers to each other. As an example, in the transportation industry that I reside in, we often use Tote to bring up our freight over the water. So we're one of Tote's largest customers. They in turn are one of our largest vendors. So it's a very unique situation where the organization does not mandate that we work together, but they encourage us to do that. The reason that they don't mandate that we work together is they believe that over the course of time there would be an erosion of rates, and more importantly, there would be erosion in the level of service that we're providing to each other if it's a mandated relationship. So if you are forced to deal with one of your sister companies over the course of time, you know, the thought is that you'll let down your guard and just say, oh, they have to do business with me, so I don't have to treat them like a real customer. So it's a unique set of circumstances. At the end of the day, we all have a responsibility to do what's best for each of our respective enterprises. We're each responsible for our individual P&Ls, but ultimately we have to see the value in being part of a larger organization.
And you mentioned Tote Maritime Alaska, and you being a customer of theirs, moving your trailers on the water, as you said, from the lower 48, from the port of Tacoma up to the port of Alaska. Do you find yourself negotiating over the freight rates they would charge you for moving your trailers on their roll-on, roll-off vessels, or do you accept a tariff as given?
Well, we do, again, have free will, and we do use Matson, one of the other partners in the industry. We are obviously encouraged to regulate that and limit that to as much as we can, but we are allowed to use the services that we think will allow us best to service our customers. And sometimes that's a function of rate, sometimes that's a function of schedule. Obviously there are two different types of vessels, even as something as simple as load securement is different on each of those vessels. So we're not forced to, we're encouraged. Obviously it makes sense to keep that money in-house, if you will, recycle the dollars within the organization. But we are able to use other services as we see fit. Now we move the vast majority over tote, but we also use air, we use rail, and we do make a couple runs over the road every week.
Okay. What are some of the key facts and/or statistics we ought to know about Carlisle Transportation?
Well, Carlisle next year will be celebrating its 40th anniversary. It started in the 80s. We are one of the largest transportation solution providers in the state. We do provide a wide spectrum of services beyond just trucks. I think that's what we're most famous for, is the ice road truckers, heavy haul, but we do provide a multitude of services. We currently employ roughly 450 employees. We have a multitude of facilities throughout the state of Alaska. We have terminals in Kenai, Seward, Anchorage, Kodiak, Fairbanks, Prudhoe Bay. So we're pretty expansive. We do believe that we are handling a large portion of the freight coming into the state, but we also understand that we are one of many service providers servicing the Alaskan market.
Do you have terminals outside of Alaska?
We do have terminals outside of Alaska. We have terminals in Houston, Edmonton, Tacoma. The Edmonton and Houston terminals are primarily based around oil field activity. A lot of oil field resources come up from those regions and oftentimes go back if there are specialty tools that need to be returned. In the Tacoma facility, we are consolidating freight for movement advancement to Alaska, and that is our largest facility in the lower 48. The Edmonton and Houston facility, like I said, are primarily around oil field, but we do pick up other regional freight. Those lower 48 terminals, their primary function is to consolidate and advance freight to Alaska. We're not typically a regional hauler in those areas, so we're not typically moving freight around in the Houston area, for example, for the general public. It's typically moving north.
And what is the size of your fleet? How many tractors do you have?
We're currently running about 200 tractors, and we have over 1,200 pieces of trailering equipment.
And quite the configuration of trailer, right?
Yes, we can have flatbed trailers of various lengths. We can have vans of various lengths and various configurations. Those vans can either be dry vans, insulated vans, reefer vans, and then we have one of the largest heavy haul fleets in Alaska. That fleet includes the largest heavy haul trailer in the state, which is a trailer that's rated for over 100 tons.
And you mentioned the number of employees. Do you also employ, or should I say use, owner-operators in any of your operations?
We do. What we use the owner-operators for is to help us address the peaks in consumption. You know, my philosophy is the team's philosophy. If we can always say yes to everything, we probably have too much. And so what the owner-operators allow us to do is address peak consumption when all of the Carlisle assets, trucks and trailers and drivers are being fully utilized. We use those to augment our activities.
And when those peaks occur, are they rather predictable, seasonal, or can they happen at any time?
The peaks are pretty predictable. It is moderately incongruent. We have a classic bell curve as far as our activity level, peaking in the middle of the year, but there are some seasonal work that occurs in the wintertime because of Prudhoe Bay, the North Slope activity that has to be done in the winter, where we primarily run the owner-operators between Fairbanks and Prudhoe Bay. I know that some of the other carriers use owner-operators between Anchorage and Fairbanks, but we predominantly use them between on the haul road between Fairbanks and Prudhoe Bay. It is a model that has worked very well for us.
And getting a little deeper into that model, do these owner-operators bring their own tractors to their services, or do they use your tractors?
So typically in that model, as we look at it, there are a couple different ways we can augment our fleet. So we can use other carriers And typically those other carriers have their own DOT numbers, have their own insurance, have their own tractors, have their own license. And if there is any type of event, those events would be recorded against those carriers. In the owner-operator model, they're using their equipment, their trucks, our trailers, and if you will, they're carrying our flag, meaning that if there is an incident, if there's an accident, an infraction against DOT standards, any type of environmental issue, that actually goes against our DOT number. So the owner-operators are independent drivers who are not employees of Carlisle. We don't set their schedules. The only element that we have that relates to their schedule is we identify when to pick up loads and when they need to be dropped off, but they are independent operators.
How does Carlisle Transportation fit into the Alaska economy? Would you say its role is critical?
Well, I would say that the industry is critical and we are a large player in that industry. I think that we all agree that the cost of living in Alaska is generally understood, that it's higher than the lower 48. We also understand that the cost of moving goods to Alaska contributes to that higher cost of living. I think if the industry were to shrink, or if Carlisle were not in the industry, I think you would see, I don't know that it would be measurable, but I think you would see a noticeable change in potentially the cost of goods, as again, transportation is a large element of that, and you may even see a change in the living conditions, quality of life, health and welfare of the public. Transportation, as you know, plays a vital role in getting commodities that we're using every day to the market, and so yes, I think our role is critical to the living conditions in Alaska.
Carlisle Transportation competes with other for-hire carriers based in Alaska. How competitive would you say the market is, and how do you compete for freight?
The market itself is very dynamic, and what we noticed over the last 4 or 5 years as the economy was in the recession, that customer decisions were being more driven by cost elements of the relationship. We believe that that is a very slippery slope. If you're merely going to sell on cost, then you really can't espouse any of your virtues or your benefits. And so when you obtain business on cost, you always run the risk that the next guy will do it for less. So it's an incredibly competitive market. The customers are very demanding, and when we see other industries, if you will, like the FedExes or the UPSs, the Amazon, a lot of those services, our customers are now expecting us as general freight haulers to provide, and so that's very demanding. But what we typically try to do is sell to our customers based upon the fact that we have an infrastructure, we have assets, we have experience, we are adding value. As I say to the team quite often, we are doing things for customers that they either cannot or will not do for themselves. If they don't want to go out and set up 10 or 12 terminals and buy 200 or 300 trucks and 1,100, 1,200 trailers, we can help you with that. If you don't have people that have been in the industry for 20, 25, 30 years, we have that expertise. So we are effectively providing solutions, and I think that's one of the things where we've tried to change our identity. Most people look at us as truckers, ice road truckers, heavy haulers. We're providing solutions. We're doing things for customers, again, that they don't want to do or can't do for themselves.
And turning the coin from competition to cooperation, Alaska is rather renowned in the motor carrier sector for a lot of cooperation. If there's a truck that's in trouble along the Alaska Highway or along the Dalton Highway up to the North Slope, other truckers from other companies will stop and help, right? Because we're all in it together. Could you say something about that?
Well, it's quite often. I think that we all try to be good industry stewards. We all try to be advocates for safety. We understand that some of these conditions can be life-threatening. And so we have a responsibility, and we accept it. We take it very seriously to stop when we see other carriers or other motorists that may be in need. We oftentimes will provide resources for them to at least get to a safe point. There have been numerous experiences on the haul road where we have assisted other drivers. Quite some time ago, they made the haul road public, and so you're seeing a lot, if you will, of civilian traffic. Oftentimes, those people don't know what they're getting into, they're ill-prepared, and so we have had to stop and provide services to those individuals. But yes, in general, there's a tremendous amount of communication on the haul road back and forth about potential safety items. There's a lot of camaraderie and a lot of, like I said, industry stewardship where regardless of the brand, they're all drivers. They're out in the middle of nowhere, help's not coming soon. And so they tend to help themselves quite a bit. And we fully support that.
What components go into your calculation of your tariff? Do you have a standard published tariff, or are charges made on a customer-by-customer basis?
So generally speaking, tariff, I'm relatively new to the industry and everybody cringes when I say this, but I call tariff MSRP. And so tariff is primarily constructed of, our industry, I think sometimes we overcomplicate it. Our formula is the same as everybody else's. Profit is revenue minus fixed and variable cost. And so we have to weigh in all of our costs and scale them accordingly. And we have what we call a published tariff. It's available on our website. Anybody can see it. And typically what we do is tariff is for freight that is uncommon or doesn't move consistently or on a regular basis. Customers who move with us on a regular basis, who have high volume, who have a rate letter or contract with us, don't typically ship on tariff. But tariff is the structure that we use to identify our basic costs and then identify the appropriate rates based upon those costs. And, excuse me, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to add, when you're establishing your tariff, give us an idea of what goes into that. Are you looking at the weight of the shipment? Are you thinking about the volume, density as well? What goes into that? What's the formula like?
So in the transportation industry, when you're evaluating your freight costs, there are many different variables to consider. When you look at the freight, as you referenced, there is a lot of compatibility items, issues or concerns that you have to address when you're shipping freight. You cannot take car batteries and mix it with groceries. You can't take paint and mix it with other items. So there are many variables to consider as in regards to hazmat or hazardous material, but also, as you point out, there's a tremendous amount of consideration given to physical dimensions for cubing or density for weight. You also have to take a look at specific lanes have different costs because in different regions we have different compensation structures. You also have to take into consideration when we're looking at our costs, we have several different models that we use. There is some freight that really doesn't touch our facilities, and so we try not to burden that with all of our facilities and overhead costs. So it's actually quite complex, but at the end of the day, it still goes back to revenue minus fixed and variable costs. And so we are constantly analyzing that. And I will say that the vast majority of our freight ships under what's called a rate letter, which is a non-binding document. It just identifies what commodity you will be shipping with us, what frequency, the physical attributes of it, and then if you were to ship something off of that, we might say, for instance, if you're set up to ship a lot of general construction commodities with us, paint, wood, timber, things of that nature, and if you send us something that's off of the rate letter, at that point in time we might ship that at tariff. If we realize that that's occurring on a frequent basis, we might go back to you and say, let's build that back into the rate letter.
And building on the tariff, a related feature is the contract of carriage or the bill of lading. I gather you have a standard bill of lading that you present to your customers.
We do.
But you would also find yourself maybe negotiating over terms within the bill of lading. Does that happen?
Typically that does not happen that often. Oftentimes what we'll see is a contractor, maybe if it's a large entity, a government entity, maybe somebody that's not used to doing business in Alaska, they will offer us a multi-page contract. Oftentimes what we'll try to do is find the middle ground on that contract. There are instances where they're trying to thrust more liability or responsibility onto us. We try to avoid those situations. Ultimately, the bill of lading is the shipping document that's used to address most claims, if you will, or issues. But there are a lot of instances where customers ask us to sign their documents. We obviously try to avoid that. And it would surprise you, there's quite a bit of freight that just moves on rate letters where we describe the commodity, describe kind of the general cadence of the shipping and the general scope of work, and that's about it.
And give us a general idea of what goes into the bill of lading. It basically describes how the carriage is going to take place. Can you give us a general idea of what you look for when you present your bill of lading, or should you sign somebody else's alternative for a bill of lading? What did you want to see covered in the bill of lading?
Usually the bill of lading is the primary document. Whenever you have a customer present a document to you, typically they're trying to shift liability to you in the form of indemnity, liquidated damages. What we have often found is that many of the customers come out with a document that's pretty hard and fast, and what we do is we typically have lawyers talk to lawyers, and that moves along a lot quicker, and we find out sometimes it's just terminology or perspective. We avoid situations where, you know, customers always say to us, well, we would never do that to you. Then we say, well, then take it out of the document. And that's where you kind of run into some challenges where it's like, well, no, corporate wants us to keep that in there. So oftentimes what we see is documents that are presented to us by maybe local or regional people that have come from their corporate offices. And so it's easier for us just to have the attorneys look into that and have that dialogue. They speak the same language, they understand what we're trying to do. Again, typically what our customers attempt to do is shift liability and responsibility to us. They attempt to get the lowest possible price with the lowest volume commitment. That's what those documents typically try to do.
So what are you looking for in a, what we could call a clean bill of lading? What do you want to see etched in there that you have in your own bill of lading? Obviously what goes on at origin, what goes on between origin and destination, and what happens at destination. Is it as simple as that, or are there more things you would want to see written in that bill of lading?
Well, it's pretty straightforward. You know, obviously, you know, we have a program in our organization generally that we call Receive It Right. And when we receive a piece of freight, that at that point of inception, that is the precursor for a lot of activity that goes on within our organization. It tells us the physical dimensions, it tells us whether it's hazardous, it tells us the rates sometimes. And so what we want to do is we want to receive it right. We want to make sure that we know who the shipper is. We want to make sure we know the consignee. We want to make sure that we know the destination or the delivery point. And so it is not overly complicated. Again, there are some specific laws that deal with that. I'm relatively new to the industry, so I couldn't read those back to you verbatim. But in general, I would say the vast majority of our freight ships on our bill of lading,
Okay.
and that's our preference.
Mr. Howard, apart from providing freight haulage services, what other services does Carlisle Transportation provide to its customers and or the community?
So Carlisle has always been very community-minded, and we provide a lot of donations and in-kind services, and those donations vary from local and regional entities. I will tell you that I'm part of the Salt Chuck Giving Committee. They set those up in each geographic region that they work in. We primarily focus on child and youth development and welfare and post-secondary education. So I think it was pretty commonplace, and I think it's still pretty commonplace. If you see some type of community event, a fundraiser, a charitable event, it's very common to see that Carlisle has either donated services, donated resources or funds, and that we have people volunteering there. So to that extent, we're very community-minded. Salt Chuck not only supports that, but they believe in it. We have a preset amount that we give back every year. I'm on that committee, and it's very enlightening, and I'm proud that we're able to still do those things for the community. As far as our business support, beyond just trucking services, Carlisle provides warehousing services. We will embed logisticians within other organizations when they have short-term projects. Those individuals will have a fiduciary responsibility to execute in the best manner on behalf of the customer. As an example, if we were to embed a logistician in a large oil field company and they required us to support their project, that individual has a responsibility to pick and select the best value and service provider for that customer, even if it's not Carlisle or one of the Salt Chuck organizations. We also have a public warehouse where we do a lot of JIT type supply for companies that want to get commodities up here and stockpile them so that they're ready to deliver those products on short notice. We have one company where we actually we ship up and then hold office printers and computers and things of that nature. When we're called on, we deliver them to the customer. We don't hook them up, but we put them in place and call them and let them know that it's been delivered, and then their technicians come out and install them. And then we also provide a lot of consulting work where new companies that are coming into Alaska will often ask us to educate them on the resources that are available to them, the dynamics of the infrastructure, environmental concerns, construction concerns, seasonal concerns. So it's more than just trucking, and that's why I said, we've really become a well-rounded solutions company.
Absolutely. Yes, beyond just motor carriage, the logistical solutions as well. Just wondering about when we think about the haul road up to the North Slope, some of the odd configurations that you could have up there for providing services to the North Slope. Can you tell me some of your own recollections about some of the stranger configurations of some of your motor carrier haulage up there?
Well, as I referenced, we have the state's largest heavy haul trailer. That trailer is rated at over 100 tons. When it's got its primary mover and all the attachments required to spread that weight out over the road, it can be over 200 feet long. And so oftentimes what we'll do is, depending upon the time of the year, we may have as many as 4 or 5 trucks literally bumper to bumper pushing that truck. And so what we'll do is we'll remove the fifth wheel plate, we'll put 40,000 pounds on the drive axles, and those trucks will literally be pushing that truck up the road. In our normal configuration with a 40-foot van or 45-foot trailer, that trip from Fairbanks to Prudhoe Bay, good weather, no issues, can take roughly 15 to 18 hours. In the configuration that I described, where we have this long trailer and pilot cars and push trucks, that can take anywhere from 3 to 5 days. And so we'll be moving oil field equipment, modules, specialty items for that industry in that area. In the old days, they used to pull that, but what they found was that if there was an issue, you couldn't separate from the load, and there were some geometry issues where if you were rounding a corner and you were pulling, once you had cleared the corner, you were pulling them diagonally and they weren't ready to make that corner. So this push truck method that we use, we'll use it from Anchorage to all the way to Prudhoe Bay. We'll use it to move items from Valdez all the way to Prudhoe Bay. And there are some unique instances with the state of Alaska bridge laws where we've actually had to get in that configuration, and then when we get to certain bridges, we pull up one of our older trucks that we've stripped down and we put our smallest guy in there, not somebody that's like me, and we'll cross that bridge with a secondary mover, unhook that unit, get the other mover hooked up to it, and then continue on. So it's really challenging with the configuration of the road. You throw in the bridge laws, and it makes it very unique to move large items out of Anchorage, out of Big Lake, out of Valdez, up to Prudhoe Bay.
And thinking a little further about this, some of the challenges, a lot of material going up to the North Slope, and material coming in from Houston, Edmonton, Canada, all the way into Alaska. What about your backhaul? Is backhaul a real challenge for you? A lot of stuff going up, but what's coming back in the other direction?
There's not a tremendous amount coming back, and that's what creates the challenges. That's what makes it difficult to be profitable on those lanes. When you look at it, it is typically recycling type commodities, fish in the summertime, but that can also be very demanding. They are very specific about when loads can be picked up, how long they can take, what temperatures they need to be kept at. So the backhaul concept is very challenging. If you looked at that lane, if you will, the over-the-road lane, it is brutally competitive in that many of those carriers are effectively trying to just get their fuel costs to get home. They're making their money on the head haul, and on the back haul, they just need to get home and not lose money. The vernacular of backhaul is challenging coming out of Prudhoe Bay, because backhaul implies to us that we will move it at our leisure. Oftentimes the customers think, hey, you're going back anyways, just throw this on there. Well, that might mean that it might sit there for a long time. And so even that vernacular is a little bit challenging when you're dealing with some customers. Again, backhaul means at our leisure, our convenience, when we have trailers, when we have drivers. If somebody actually wants us to go to Prudhoe Bay and grab something, that's not necessarily a backhaul.
Yes, and you were mentioning various costs, variable costs, fixed costs, etc. So is it fair to say that Carlisle Transportation on the motor carrier side, and indeed a lot of motor carriers, are operating with a very, very narrow margin of operating revenue over operating costs. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. I know that it's very challenging, and it's somewhat of a misnomer to our customers. We have been the recipient of some of those letters when the economy gets skinny and people ask us to, cut this and cut that, and it's not really accurate to say we have high margins, and sometimes people feel like we do. For us, it can be something as simple as when we're hauling on the Prudhoe Bay side and we're hauling commodities such as methanol or ultra-low sulfur diesel, if we don't clean those trailers when they get back to Fairbanks, we can lose several hundred gallons of payload, and that loss of payload diminishes our margin on those loads. So quite frequently when those trailers come back, whether it be winter or summer, they have to go into the steam bay and get cleaned off, or we may lose as many as 300 to 500 gallons of capacity, which makes it very ineffective, very inefficient, and to your point, cuts into our profit in that lane.
Does Carlisle Transportation rely on any government funding at the federal, state, or municipal levels?
No, we work for the government in several different capacities, but we do not receive any subsidies or any funding or anything like that.
Mr. Howard, tell us a little bit about your dealings with government regulations, federal, state, and municipal, and how they impact your operations. Do you have significant environmental regulations to comply with?
Well, at the most basic level, there are some very stringent protocols that relate to the movement of hazardous material, hazardous waste. We always have to conform to those things. On the broader level, our industry is heavily regulated as it relates to hours of service, how many hours our employees, our drivers can drive. So that is probably the single biggest regulatory issue that we deal with on a regular basis, is how many hours do we have available, how many hours have we already consumed, how much work do we have left. Managing those hours is probably, again, the single biggest regulatory issue that we have.
Mm-hmm. And if I have the numbers right, in the lower 48, the latest hours of service regulations are the driver has 11 hours of driving time maximum, with a maximum of 14 hours of duty time. But in Alaska, it is a little more liberal. We have a different take, or at least the federal government has a different take on Alaska. It's 15 hours of driving time max with 20 hours of duty time max. Can you tell us, why do you think Alaska got that exception, and how are you living with those current rules?
Well, it was before my time, but it's my understanding that because of our limited infrastructure, the limited support that drivers in general had between different locations, the DOT, the federal motor carriers, allowed us to extend our hours of service. We still have the responsibility of ensuring that our drivers are well rested and properly prepared for their activities every day. When you look at our industry, hours of service, or fatigue, if you will, is one of the leading causes of road incidents. And so we spend a tremendous amount of time talking to our drivers about being rested, being ready, making sure their equipment's ready to go. As it relates on a functional or business level, we take every measurable step that we can to ensure that they're using their hours driving. That's their most valuable commodity to us. We try not to have the driver securing loads, loading loads, doing things of that nature. Now they're responsible for inspecting those loads, checking those loads as they go down the road, but as far as using the bulk of their hours, we want them to be driving hours, not discretionary hours doing non-driving activities.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like technology may be coming to the rescue a little bit when it comes to complying with the hours of service regulations. I'm thinking along the lines of electronic logging devices, the ELDs. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us how Carlisle is using those?
Yeah, so it's interesting. On the industry level, there was a tremendous amount of concern. There was a belief that many drivers in the industry beyond Alaska in the lower 48 were expanding on their hours of service and not documenting them properly. And there was also a belief that when the ELDs came out, that many drivers would decide that they didn't want to put up with that. They wouldn't tolerate it. The technology was beyond them. Mm-hmm. So we were worried that the industry would see a contraction of available hours throughout all regions, all locations, all types of segments. And so Carlisle took it upon itself to input these electronic devices well before they were required by the federal standards. And I believe we were the first trucking company that did it fleet-wide in Alaska. Ultimately, the date kept on getting moved back. We now understand that those logs are very easy to fully participate in and comply with. Our drivers who were somewhat reticent or reluctant now understand that it has made their lives significantly easier. They don't have to do things by memory. They don't have to keep separate notes. They don't have to do it by recollection or anything like that. They merely log in, and it differentiates when they're driving, when they have berth time. And so what we feel like is we have even better compliance to the federal motor carrier standards, and we feel like we have even better data integrity as it relates to the federal motor carrier standards. There have been some ancillary benefits from the logs. We can also use those to measure speeds. We can use those to measure where the drivers are as a location device. And so there have been other ancillary benefits from the logs, and we fully believe that it's going to benefit our company and our industry.
Yes, I believe, I recall that Carlisle has been proactive. I believe the hours of service came in 2012, and the federal government mandated the ELDs in 2017, but you were compliant, I think, around 2015.
We were compliant around 2015. Again, going back to your previous dialogue about being good stewards of the industry, we have helped other trucking companies that are not related to Carlisle with training and insight as to how that went for us. And we have even provided training to some of the local, state, and federal entities that are not familiar with or were not familiar with them as they were being introduced. And so we've dedicated a tremendous amount of resources in making sure that we had high acceptance in our company and throughout the industry for the betterment of the general public and the roads and people that needed to have that information. We thought it was a profound and meaningful benefit to the industry.
Mm-hmm. And the reason why the ELDs can track the speed of the truck is because they are connected to the engine of the vehicle itself.
Correct.
And do all of your tractors in the Carlisle fleet have this?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. And the reason why you're able to have location documented as the trucks are moving along is because the ELD devices are connected via satellite communication, correct?
You have options. You can do cell phone in lower 48. Most people do cell phone because they have better coverage. You can do satellite, or you can do a combination of both. Mm-hmm. We do a combination of both. There are still some very modest areas where you don't have satellite or cell phone coverage, and then that machine will catch up, if you will, and log that data once you're back in the service area.
Are there parts on the Hull Road up to the North Slope that will fall out of even satellite communication?
Yes, there are some pockets. Again, very minor, very modest. A couple hours here, hour there, but for the most part we have good coverage and we're able to identify. And that data is always loaded back in once they're within range, so it's not a total blackout.
Okay. How do you measure success in your business? Does your company use any key performance indicators?
So we have key performance indicators for our business. As you know, Carlisle was a very modest organization when it came to IT applications and things of that nature. Many years ago, we are advancing on that. Some of the KPI indicators that we use are generally related to hours of service. Some of the KPIs that we use are related to cube and weight utilization of our trailers. Effectively coming over the water, it benefits us and our customers if we can put more freight and fewer trailers. So we spend a lot of time looking at cube and weight density. And ultimately, the primary ones for us are related to customer satisfaction. Most customers, the key element for them is on-time delivery. And so we continue to look at ways to enhance those KPIs, and we are on a path that you're very familiar with. We use continuous improvement in our organization. We use that to empower our employees to use their innovations, their ideas, their experience to build better products for our customers. But one of the things that we have to be mindful of is we've gone through such an evolution within our organization. Sometimes it sounds peculiar, but we have to remind ourselves that we're building things for the customers. There's so many things that we want to do, and so now we're regrouping and making sure that we have an adequate amount of key performance indicators that are customer facing. Again, sometimes you can overthink that and have too many. The main one for customers is on-time delivery.
Okay. Do you find that with the Saltchuk sister companies, do you find yourselves having meetings with your counterparts looking at the finances as a group, or are you looked at as an individual unit in a silo and you're just reporting up to the corporate head at Saltchuk? How does it work?
So each of the operating companies have their own CFOs. Those CFOs report to the respective presidents, but they do have a dotted line to Saltchuk CFO, and we are gauged based upon our own performance, the performance of the operating unit that we're responsible for, but there is some, what I will say, regional influence. As an example, we all prepare our budgets at the same time. We actually refer to them as plans. We all prepare our plans at the same time and we submit them at the same time. And so sometimes we're challenged with any of the inconsistencies or anything that's incongruent. For example, we'll pick on Toad a little bit. If we were to prepare a budget and they prepared their plan, their budget, and they said the market was going to be down 10%, and we said it was going to be up 10%. Obviously, Saltchuk would take recognition of that and say, okay, which one of you guys is right, and why do you see it that way? So we're responsible for our own performance, but we are gauged against the others, and we, like I said, have regional, if you will, comparisons that they use to validate the data that we're submitting.
Well, I suppose, tell me if I'm wrong, but being part of a big consortium of companies like that, it should make it relatively easier for strategic planning, because if you were an independent company, as Carlisle once was, you would not necessarily have access to what Tote's forecast would be. Now, Tote shares its forecast with you and vice versa. Does that help in the planning process at all?
We share it at a very high level, and we usually share it after the fact. We identify those plans independently, and I think that's a good process because it, for lack of better words, we don't conspire and maybe build ourselves up to see the same things. We do that individually. What I would say the challenging part is, and you referenced this earlier, we are part of a larger operating enterprise, but we have different business models and different margins. As you know, the air carrier business has different cost implications and cost factors. Trucking industry is different from water. Water is different from bulk fuel and bulk lubricants. So it's a very dynamic group to be part of.
Also, you have a role to play in the Alaska Trucking Association, which is basically the lobby group for the state of Alaska. What's your connection with the Alaska Trucking Association?
So I was previously on the board. Several Carlisle members have been on the board, and several Carlisle members are past presidents. We believe in participating to the extent that, again, that we want to be good industry stewards. If I could broadcast to the rest of the industry, I would like to see better participation from that group. There are a lot of individual companies, smaller operators that benefit from the lobbying activities and the efforts of the ATA, and they are kind of riding on the coattails, so we'd like to see them get in and participate a little more, both in attendance and participation and in funding. But we believe in the ATA. We believe it's a great forum for the trucking companies to get together and lobby on common causes. And so we encourage participation. Like I said, we've had quite a few of our employees that have been on the board and participated.
Do you find that the lobbying is targeted to Juneau, or can it go beyond into, let's say, Olympia for Washington State, or even into Washington, D.C.?
So there's each state has their own trucking association, and there are different regions, and then there's the American Trucking Association. What we have found is that the best bang for the buck is to work on the local level, because there are many issues that are unique to each region, and there are some larger issues that are common to all of us. And we do participate back in Washington, D.C. with Saltchuk lobbyists, but in general, we feel like the most benefit is derived from working at the local level.
Okay. Have you personally been involved in some of the lobbying processes, or at least planning for the lobbying itself?
We have. It was unique. Every year they prepare a packet to go down and visit with the state legislature. What I've encouraged them to do is to try to lobby specifically on behalf of our industry and to be engaged and aware and involved in larger state issues such as the budget, but I know that the legislature gets a tremendous amount of perspective from other entities within the state of Alaska. So I think the most meaningful impact that we can have is when we focus on transportation, infrastructure issues for the state.
What's it like running Carlisle Transportation? Could you walk us through a typical day in your job?
Well, a typical day starts early and ends late. So typically, we're always connected. We're connected 24/7. We have smartphones, and we're expected to engage and use those to the benefit of the organization. So, there's never really a break point. Honestly, I don't take a tremendous amount of time away from the office, because if I do, I just get bombarded when I get back. So even when you're away from the office, you maintain your connectivity, and you acknowledge the cell phones and the texts and the emails. But a typical day for me starts in the office. A couple years ago, we thought we were going to run out of room, and so they thought about moving us off-site, and I was totally opposed to that. I believe that the leadership of the organization needs to be embedded at the terminals, so they can see, hear, and feel what the employees are doing, how they're doing, what help they need. And so a lot of my time is spent talking about and identifying the path for the cultural issues that we have or challenges that we have, and establishing, making sure that we're honoring our brand. Carlisle has a very strong safety culture, and we want to make sure that we abide by that and that we're fully engaged in that every day. The next step for us is we spend a tremendous amount of time talking about integrity. Our main asset in this industry, with this community, with our partners, is maintaining our integrity. And so we don't want to do anything that harms the brand. And then ultimately, we obviously spend time talking about our bottom line. And so my day might be immersed in line driver meetings or driver meetings first thing in the morning, meeting with people to go over our safety standards. Hey, do you have any safety questions, any safety problems? Making sure that's top of mind all the time. And then we'll spend a lot of time talking about, taking care of our customers, doing the right thing for our customers, making sure that we're not harming the brand. I spend a lot of time talking about the brand. And then ultimately, I spend a lot of time talking about our strategic, our strategic initiatives, our over the horizon perspective. What are we trying to do? Why are we doing these things? And how will those things lead us to sustainable profitability? In the Carlisle organization, I'm afforded the opportunity to meet with just about every team member. So I get to talk to the VPs and the directors and the managers, frontline personnel in our yard and our dock and our warehouse, our drivers. So it's a pretty full day. Obviously, they don't ask me a lot of technical questions, but I try to set the tone and let them know, how we want to be viewed in the market.
Looking to the future, what would you say is the biggest challenge facing Carlisle Transportation, and what is its biggest opportunity?
So as far as the challenge, I think what's unique about our organization and about our industry, oftentimes we become enamored with the big trucks, and Tote has the big boats, and NAC has the 767s now. We have the Foss, one of the world's longest standing tug and barge service companies. So we get enamored with the CapEx. I think the biggest challenge for us, and where I spend a lot of my time, is identifying, recruiting, and retaining qualified personnel for our company. And so when we look to the future, the industry is struggling with the dearth of qualified people, drivers entering into this industry. All companies, I think, are faced with an aging workforce. And so the challenges are to bring in people who can contribute, who have the necessary accreditation. I think that's going to be the single biggest challenge for us. On the functional level, I think one of the challenges for us will be to maintain our discipline that we've established through the downturn in the oil industry. We have cultivated a lot of new customers, which has allowed us to diversify our client base. And historically, what you've seen in the trucking industry is when oil returns, everybody kind of migrates toward that activity, because it's, if you will, the higher margin work. And so we're going to be challenged to find a balance between those two, maintaining the new customers that we just cultivated and supporting the oil industry, which we all know is very important to the state. As far as the opportunities for us, one of the things that I try to espouse to our group is Carlisle has the opportunity to be the best service provider if we can execute at a high level consistently. And that's what most companies in our industry struggle with. They can operate at a high level, but can they do that consistently? And so if we are able to do that, I believe we'll have more opportunities within the state of Alaska servicing our existing customers, and then we'll have the opportunity to branch out and do some work outside of Alaska. But for now, our focus is on Alaska, and even with our facilities outside of the state, again, their primary purpose is to consolidate and gather freight, capture freight for advancement to Alaska. But again, I think our opportunity is to become even more efficient, even more modern, even more technically adept and advanced, and that will create opportunities in new regions with new customers.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us as we study Carlisle Transportation?
Well, I think Carlisle's a very unique company. When you look at the transportation industry and you start to compare them to other companies in the lower 48, one of the things that you'll find about the Alaskan industry is that most of the trucking companies in Alaska are incredibly diverse and offer services to a multitude of different industries and segments. There are a few companies in Alaska that have a singular identity. They haul fuel. Primarily, they might haul fuel because they sell the fuel. When you get into the lower 48, you're going to see a lot of companies that just have a singular identity. They either do household goods, they do full truckload or less than truckload, or they do bulk, either liquid or dry. Carlisle and the other partners in the industry are pretty diverse. We do all of those things. And so, my challenge to the team is, you can't find a move that we can't do, but you just might not like our price. Right? We can do any move you want. It just might be more money than you want to spend. And so, that's the thing when you look at Carlisle and again, the industry partners in Alaska, the only way that we can survive is by being diverse. The individuals, the companies that have maintained a singular identity, they're moderately small, niche operators, very focused. We want to be more than that. We want to be a very full service, expansive company. And so when you look at us and compare us to the lower 48, that's one of the biggest challenges, going back to your KPI dialogue. It was challenging for us to find other companies to compare ourselves to. So as we were working through modernizing the company, we just had to benchmark where we were and where we wanted to go and identify incremental steps, how long it would take us to do that, what resources we needed, and the appropriate timeline for that. So that'll be something interesting as you're studying other companies to see how diverse they are and how they handle that.
And of course, what is unique about the motor carrier business in general is you're part of that last mile.
Right.
And I know the ATA is Alaska Trucking Association is famous for talking about the last mile.
Right.
Anything you want to say about the last mile of delivery?
Well, it's getting more and more challenging, right? As you see, obviously, the overnight carriers, if you will, FedEx and UPS, they have created a certain level of expectation, and now Amazon is raising that level of expectation. I think the last time that you and I met, we joked about it and said, oh, we're not worried about Amazon, but I'm pretty sure that's what, Blockbuster said and BlackBerry and a couple others said. So we're paying attention to them. They provide different services, but our customers are expecting us to have the same features and benefits and quality, and a lot of demands are being placed on real-time information. I think in the old days it was adequate to say, yes, we picked up your freight, and yes, we think it's going to be here in a few days, and that's no longer acceptable. They want to know when you picked it up, they want to know where it is in the stream, they want to know when they're going to get it, and oftentimes they'll call us up and it'll be customers that are ordering on behalf of somebody else, or a purchaser that's ordering on behalf of somebody else, and who signed for it, when did they sign for it, what condition was it in. So a lot more demands are being placed on our trucking industry because of services and features and benefits that are being offered in other industries. So that'll be interesting to see how that final mile quality of service really impacts us.
Absolutely. This has been a fascinating discussion. Mr. Howard, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure you'll agree that Carlisle Transportation Systems plays a critical role in the Alaska economy and beyond. Thanks for watching.
Visit us at business.uaa.alaska.edu.